Hey everybody, so today we're going to be talking about moral realism, which is what most people are referring to when they talk about objective morality. And I'm making this video because I frequently meet people who are curious why many people believe in moral realism and often have some trouble understanding what actually it would mean for morality to be objective or real. So I thought that this video would help clear things up, possibly. Let's hope so. Well, so here's a quick history of moral realism. So, Plato's theory of forms postulated that there was a realm of forms which contained the good, right? This is early Platonic metaphysics. Later religions like Christianity, Judaism, Islam all postulated a form of moral realism as well, this one named divine command theory. During the Enlightenment, we started to see moral realism questioned by major figures like David Hume, but a lot of philosophers just stuck with it anyways. Karl Marx was a moral realist. He defended moral realism in his work, and this heavily influenced a lot of political philosophy, especially leftist political philosophy. And in the 20th century, we had a turn towards a new branch of philosophy named analytic philosophy, which incorporated natural science, logic, and mathematics. And this is when the term moral realism was first coined as a sort of descriptor for the objective, systematic style of ethics. Most contemporary analytic philosophers think that moral realism is the best theory of metaethics that we have. So if you take any ethics classes, typically the classes will presuppose moral realism, and if they don't, well, you'll have to argue using moral realist concepts anyways. That's typically how ethics is taught. It's not taught as a subjectivist affair where we're doing creative writing and talking about our personal tastes, right? So, specifically, how is moral realism defined by philosophers? So, it's a three-part thesis. The first part of this thesis is that ethical propositions are truth-apt, i.e. they can be true or false. Now, an ethical proposition is any kind of proposition that makes a moral claim, such as stealing is wrong, or you shouldn't beat up random people, or it's morally good to help others. So, according to moral realism, these propositions are truth-apt and they can be true or false. So, here's some example of two other propositions that are truth-apt. Riddick was born in New Jersey. That can be true or false, and I can tell you that it's true. There are an odd number of planets in our galaxy. Okay, here's an example of a proposition that's truth-apt, and we don't know if it's true or false, but we know that it's truth-apt just because of its structure. Here's an example of something that's not truth-apt. Don't drink that water, right? That's a command. Can that be true or false? No, it can't be. So that is not truth-apt. The second part of this thesis is that some of these propositions can be known to be true. So, for example, statements about unicorns in our world, if you can imagine someone saying, you know, Jason is a unicorn, or unicorns are big or something, are always going to be false, right? Unicorn propositions are always false in our world because we don't have such a thing as unicorns. The exception is fictionally, and we'll get onto that later because there is such a thing as moral fictionalism. Then the final part of this thesis is that the truth value of these propositions is not contingent on someone's personal attitudes. So if someone says Halloween is more fun than Christmas, that's going to be because they find it more fun. So that's contingent on their attitude. So the moral realist argument is that moral propositions are not. So there are two types of moral realism, and this is something that's not super important unless you're going to get into the deep nitty-gritty of meta-ethical literature and either argue for or argue against moral realism. But it's important to know anyways in case, well, you know, you do want to go down that route. So the two types of moral realism, the first type is naturalism. So under naturalism, moral properties, so things like right and wrong, or moral and immoral, are natural properties. And there are a few different definitions of what this would mean, but it typically means that it's the kind of thing that can be dealt with by science. And further, under moral naturalism, these properties can be reduced into other properties like pleasure, suffering, death, life, all things that are empirically observable. So some examples of naturalists would be the Cornell realists, which is a group of philosophers from Cornell who defend naturalist moral realism. Nicholas Sturgeon, Thomas Boyd, David Brink, right? So non-naturalism is the alternative, and under this view, moral properties are not natural properties, and they cannot be reduced into other things. Things like good and bad, they exist simpliciter. You can't break those things down further. So the way that we arrive at them is not through science. It's through intuition, pure reason, divine revelation, things like that. So some examples of non-naturalist moral philosophers would be like Rusheffer Landau, Michael Huemer, G.E. Moore, right? These are examples of philosophers who are non-naturalist moral realists. So why moral realism? Why do so many people believe in moral realism? Well, the main reason why is just because we do. It's just reflected in our natural patterns of thought. It just seems the case. It just seems the case that it's wrong to torture animals for no reason. It just seems the case that helping people is better than hurting them. And it just seems the case that many historical atrocities were objectively wrong, and it doesn't matter what people think about that. Now, does this mean that we're justified in believing that these things are real? Actually, some people would argue, yes. In fact, that's how we get all of our basic beliefs. That's the doctrine of phenomenal conservatism, which basically states that it's rational to trust things as they appear to us. It's rational for me to trust that my door is white. It's rational for me to trust that I have 10 fingers. And it just appears to me to be the case that I have some reason, or that it's objectively wrong in some way, to hurt an animal for no reason. The other reason why moral realism is quite popular is because it's a very good explanation of moral language. So, for example, I hear a lot of people out there saying that morals are subjective, or that they believe that morality is subjective. And I don't think this really works with the way that we use moral language. So, say that saying it's unethical to eat bacon means that you have a negative attitude towards eating bacon. Well, take a statement like this. I have a positive attitude towards eating bacon, but it's unethical. This seems feasible. It seems to me that someone could say this, and it seems coherent. Like, they might know what happens to pigs in factory farms, but they might just, enjoy eating bacon. They might have a positive attitude towards it, but they recognize that it's unethical. Under a subjectivist view, this proposition would translate to, I have a positive attitude towards eating bacon, but I have a negative attitude towards eating bacon. So it doesn't seem like moral beliefs are the same kinds of beliefs as the ones that we have that are about tastes, right? Now, next up, many of us already believe in objective values, so it seems a bit strange to say moral realism can't be true because there are no objective values. A lot of us believe in objective epistemic values, so we believe scientific analysis is objectively a better method of gaining knowledge than guessing. Some beliefs are more justified than other beliefs. For example, if someone who's a known liar tells me a belief, that belief is less justified than if someone who's known to be very honest tells me that belief. We should believe in the conclusion of a sound argument, right? And that's objectives. So, with that in mind, one could also say that it's objectively better to hurt people than to harm them. That it's more justified to kill a person in self-defense than it is to kill a person for fun. And that we should help human beings and other animals, right? So a lot of people believe that epistemic values are objective, and it's not clear why moral values should be any different. Finally, and this isn't so much an argument as to why moral realism is true, but why many people end up using it, the alternatives to moral realism aren't more convincing than the moral realist thesis is. So why should we go with a model that isn't much more convincing, but just takes so much away from our abilities to perform ethics? It just doesn't seem like that's the model we should go with, right? Practically speaking. So these are some objections to moral realism that I think are weak. And they're only weak because I think they don't really understand the moral realist position. So if we disagree about morality, how can it be objective? Well, we disagree about a whole bunch of things with objective answers. Like, some people think that the Earth is flat, and other people think the Earth is a sphere, and it is objectively spherical. So the fact that we disagree doesn't change anything. Moral values change through time, so they're not objective. We used to think that it was morally okay to, burn people alive for being witches here in New England, and nowadays we don't. Well, this doesn't actually have anything to do with moral realism, because this is more of a sociological kind of thing. We're saying that our moral beliefs change. We're not saying that it actually was the case that it was morally okay for them to burn people alive, and it's not morally okay for us. So it doesn't have anything to do with the actual moral realist question. Then finally, I think a lot of people want there to be some kind of source who dictates morality, like some kind of creator who speaks these words out loud. Who decides morality? What is morality based on? what makes things right or wrong. But I mean, what moral realism is proposing is that moral statements would be true in the same way that mathematical statements are true, in virtue of their existing moral properties, just like there exist mathematical properties. So, that's what would make ethical propositions true, and that's what would make morality objective. It would be the moral properties that the moral realist argues in favor of the existence of, right? So, here are some of the stronger objections to moral realism. I won't be evaluating each and every one of them and giving you the counter responses, but here are some, objections to moral realism. So, the first one is, why would an agent be irrational to follow a standard which they don't care about? So, even if moral values are objective, if someone just isn't motivated by them, can we really say that this person is behaving from an objective point of view unreasonably? Do people have reasons to do things that are independent of their desire? So it's not clear how this agent is behaving unreasonably because they just don't care about the objective moral values, right? The other thing is, even if moral realism is true and if moral values exist, how could we derive them or come to know them? So we have heavily differing moral intuitions, and moral propositions are evaluative, not descriptive. So what faculties are we going to use to observe them? Now, this view isn't necessarily completely antithetical to the existence of objective morality, but it is antithetical to moral realism, because moral realism purports that we have a reliable way of knowing what's objectively wrong and objectively right. So this view here is called moral skepticism. So moral realism might be true in the sense that objective moral values might exist, but we don't have any reliable way of knowing what's actually right or wrong. And so finally, some people will deny the existence of all objective values. They'll say epistemic values don't exist either. So it's not actually true that there's an objective fact out there, like you should believe the truth, or you should use rigorous scientific reasoning instead of guessing. So under this view, action guiding truth doesn't exist, only descriptive truth. So that's another objection. And finally, some people will say epistemic values do exist, but moral values don't, because moral values are different in a way that makes it impossible for them to exist. Or perhaps we have reasons to purport the existence of epistemic values, but we don't have reasons to purport the existence of moral values. But yeah, this was a very brief overview of moral realism and some of the objections towards it that people have. I think I went over every part of moral realism here that's important because, of course, there are so many different formulations of it in more specific ways, etc. But this just about touches the major points about it. So I'll happily respond to any questions in the comments.